Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest edition of the Jake Stick with Jacob Elyachar Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Elyachar, the chief content producer and writer of JakeStick.com, a pop culture entertainment news website. Before we get started, please give us a like or give us a thumbs up if you're watching us on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on our audio platforms, please give us a 5-star rating and please also consider subscribing. I am honored and privileged to welcome this incredible illuminary from the tech world and entertainment world. He's the chairman of GeekWire. He's the chairman and founder of PicMonkey, and he's also the founder of JoySauce. So please help me welcome Jonathan Sposato to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jacob. It's an honor for me to be here. I really appreciate you taking the time.
You're so welcome. It's a privilege to talk with you as well. You've done so much to help us in the world of technology. I'm very honored to have you on my podcast.
Yeah, the honor's all mine. I'm happy to talk with you about entrepreneurship, technology, or life in general, and sort of things that sometimes confront the AAPI community and JoySauce.
That's wonderful. I'm happy to have you here. So I want to get started with the background. So when did you get interested in computer science, and how did that passion evolve into desire to pursue a career and work in the technology industry?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. To be honest, I got started really, really early, and this is going to sound, probably rather silly, but I got my first Apple II when I was about, I think, 12 or 13, and that was my payment for working this summer job where for my uncle, and he couldn't really pay me in money, or he didn't want to. He had some sort of excuse why he couldn't actually fork over any cash, and so, but what I got was this computer that he had been gifted that he didn't really know what to do with. And that was an Apple II computer. And so that tells you what generation, how old I am, that I was about 12 or 13 when the Apple II came out. And so this is the really silly part. I had seen Star Wars, and I saw some early rudimentary vector graphics that they used, like when Luke is flying down a trench and you could kind of see a TIE fighter and his targeting reticle. And I wanted to just sort of play around and create some of those graphics. And so I taught myself how to program on the Apple II to try to do some early vector graphics. There were some rudimentary tools that were available. And that eventually led me to creating my first computer games. And so I sold those commercially as a teenager through a local software company that was in Seattle, back at a time when a lot of the major game publishers, they were still all very small, but the major ones like, Synergistic Software, Sierra Online, Broderbund, Sirius, Electronic Arts, they were still relatively nascent and developing companies. And so a kid like me with no experience could walk in and say, hey, I've created this computer game. Would you publish it for me? And so that's really how I got started in technology.
It's amazing because here's the thing. I remember playing the Carmen Sandiego games, yes, and all this, and the clue finders and everything growing up in elementary school. So you played a key role growing up my childhood indirectly.
Thank you. I'm always pleased to hear, whether it's people that recognize a game that I've created, or actually much later, kind of almost mid-career. I was one of the folks involved in the early Xbox development, one of the first 6 or 7 people in the room helping us spec the Xbox. And I have an executive producer credit on Halo. And to this day, I'll run into someone who's in their 30s who will recognize my name, not from anything else that I've done, but it's like, wait, you were one of the people that made Halo. And so I'm always kind of excited when I hear that.
And speaking of Xbox and Microsoft, in your early career, you worked as a senior manager in Microsoft's consumer division, which worked on not just the Xbox, but also other projects as well. But you had the opportunity to work with the legendary co-founder, Bill Gates. So what were some of the lessons that you learned from your time at Microsoft and from Mr. Gates to help you grow your career?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. There's a lot of really fascinating stories. And I would say that, kind of making this up in real time here, it's a great question, that one of the lessons I learned is that always be truthful with the boss, and that the boss doesn't really care about anything else but you offering the truth and accuracy in terms of what's happening in the business. And so back in the day, I was very fortunate that Microsoft was, I think it still is, although it's much bigger now, but it was a true meritocracy where you could be a young 24, 25-year-old person, and Bill might be interested in the projects that you're working on and be asked to talk with Bill for like an hour or sometimes even 2 hours about what was happening. And he would drill and dive deep. And people kind of bifurcated into two groups. Either they were very, very scared and would kind of freeze up and do a lot of the human tendencies, like, like maybe if there was bad news, you would sort of obfuscate the bad news and maybe paint a more rosy picture so that he wouldn't get mad at you. Or a lot of times you would try to manipulate the conversation or steer the conversation down a rosier path. If you did that, he was so brilliant and so smart that he could just call you on it. He could see that stuff coming a mile away. Oftentimes he knew a lot more about your own project than as much as you did. So the second way that you could approach it is just to always be truthful. If he hones in on something and you don't have the right answer, just say you don't have the right answer and move on. And he goes, well, okay, come back in a week and with the right answer. And so he comes to respect you more. And over time, you develop a better reputation with him and he comes to trust you. So I'd say the first lesson is, always be honest, tell the truth. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. So that's one. The second one is a little bit more about, I guess, optics and how you communicate and your style of communication, which is be confident. There's a way that you can go about where, all of these smart leaders and captains of industry, they are human beings just like you and I. And so they can kind of smell fear and they don't respond well to fear and insecurity and things like that. What they respond well to is even if you don't know the right answer, is that you're confident about it and that you can be honest and straightforward and say, you know what, Bill, we don't know, but we're close to an answer and we can research and come back with the right answer in a few days. So if you can just be confident and self-assured, I think a lot of times these captains of industry, and I've met a lot of them and presented to them in the course of my when I was younger, they respond very well to that. And so those are the two things that I would say are interesting experiences. Yeah.
I gotta say, I would be, and I'm going to be honest with you, it'd be very difficult to approach Mr. Bill Gates because he's changed the face of technology, one of the founding fathers of technology,
Yes.
of modern day technology. So it'd be very difficult for me to try to hold my own.
Oh no, Jacob, you'd be surprised. I think that you would do really, really well. I think it really truly is about being straightforward and not trying to fall into a lot of the kind of a corporate, bureaucratic, political tendencies of hiding bad information or maybe throwing somebody else under the bus if something in your division is not doing well. Those things, when you're the boss of a big company like Microsoft, all you want to do is just get at the right answer. You don't care for anything else. And so if you can kind of align yourself to that, you'll do fine.
That's wonderful to hear. That's wonderful to hear. And I'm just so fascinated by this. So because we all that of all the industries, I gotta say, finance, technology, and the entertainment industry are the three most difficult industries. Not only get your foot in the door, but also make sure to stay there for a longevity. So, what are some of the challenges that you face working in the tech industry, and how do you overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I agree with you that technology, finance, entertainment, are all really tough industries to kind of have successful careers in. And they're all very different, actually. Maybe technology and finance are a little bit closer. I do find that by way of contrast, the entertainment industry does seem to me to be a little bit more relational, right? It is a little bit more, I mean, in every aspect of human life, it is a little bit about who you know, and do you trust this person? Is this person a known quantity? So that's a given. But in the entertainment industry, that does seem to come into play a lot, and I think that can be a challenge for those of us who are sort of coming at it as outsiders, and maybe we know fewer people. And but in the tech industry in particular, I do think a unique challenge is that things are always changing, that you always do have to keep up, and you have to normalize the way that you perceive information as that nothing is really permanent, and that it's always changing and evolving, and you never assume that things stay still. So at any one particular epoch, and I think of my life in sort of 5 to 7 year chapters, right? Maybe you do a startup, you have a cool killer idea, and it'll take you 4 or 5 years to get it right, to reach scale, to get the business model worked out, and then maybe a couple of years to even refine it and get it to even the most optimal, maximal point. And maybe you sell it, or you do a private equity deal, or you merge with another company, or you go public. And so I think of my life in 5 to 7 year chapters, and at every turn of the chapter, and it's of course not super neat, there's no road sign that says you're coming to the end of your chapter, but you have to be very, very hyper cognizant of changes in the environment, changes in the operating space, whether it's a change in actual technology, or just as important as technology, a change in consumer behavior, or sort of how people respond to nuances in UI, UX, even sort of aspects of behavioral economics, and how sometimes incentives to change user behavior, some dynamics become a little bit more important than others. And so you see that playing out all the time in the world of social media. Like why, and this is one of the things that I used to have to explain to Bill Gates back in the day, is when a new social media platform emerges, what kind of looks really similar, a lot like this other thing, but why is this other thing dying while this one is coming up? And it often has to do with these progressive evolutionary changes in user psychology and user behavior. And you have to understand.
And you brought up a great point, because look at TikTok. It's one of it's the strongest social media. It's pretty new out there. And you also look at Twitter, unfortunately, has died down because of all the behind the scenes hoo-ha.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And the reason, I mean, you could kind of look at, it's really good, Jacob. You could kind of look at, well, obviously, TikTok looks different from Twitter. TikTok is a lot more video biased and, short video clips, whereas Twitter is really about, words. And of course, you can attach other things to it, but it's really, you can look at the obvious differences, but there are also some non-obvious differences in terms of the algorithms that are underneath the surface, what causes virality, how that changes the virality coefficient of each post, and how many people that can reach. And so those differences are important to pay attention to the extent that they fundamentally impact the end user experience. So in technology, I think that's certainly one of the key challenges is keeping up with that. Yeah.
Awesome. So while we're on the subject while we're transitioning from technology, let's talk about entertainment.
Yeah.
And also technology. So earlier this year, you launched JoySauce Network. So how long has the JoySauce Network been in development? And can you describe the reaction it has received from the entertainment industry to my audience?
Yeah, you bet. So I would say that we had been incubating a concept for about 2 years, or maybe even a little more than 2 years. And it's been about 6 or 7 months since we've launched. And I would say that it's been going great. So the traffic traction's been gaining. We're growing the site all the time. And the reaction from people has been very, very positive. So far, we have not had heard any real criticisms. We live in a world nowadays where if somebody doesn't like you or like what you do, you'll hear about it. But very heartening are 3 or 4 data points that really resonated with myself and a hardworking team. And that is that in our space of advocating for AAPIs, more AAPI visibility and media, Phil Yu, who is the founder of Angry Asian Man, which has been around for about 11 years. I think that you've probably heard of Angry Asian Man. They recently won a Peabody Award, which is amazing. But when during the first week of our launch, he tweeted on Twitter that when he saw JoySauce, hey, look, I didn't expect that I would get emotional, but here I am tearing up as I see this. So that was really neat to hear from him, something like that. The other one is that GLAAD.org, which is the National LGBTQ plus advocacy organization. They've done so much to advocate for LGBTQ. They nominated us for an award after seeing a great show that we produced called Mixed Six, where we're not only inclusive of in various different couples, the challenges that they had as couples, where there's always one person in the relationship that's AAPI. But we also were inclusive of AAPIs who were also LGBTQ. And that's, goes without saying. It's like, well, of course you would include them, but you'd be surprised how oftentimes LGBTQ AAPIs tell us that they're not represented or seen in AAPI spaces. So we wanted to make sure that we did better. And so to get the acknowledgement from GLAAD.org was fantastic. And then lastly, the very prestigious Center for Asian American Media, and they're the group that puts into play millions of dollars every year to help AAPI stories get told. So if you watch a lot of PBS, if there's like a documentary or a special on a historic AAPI figure, usually the Center for Asian American Media is behind that. They gave us a huge acknowledgement and shout out to their community, saying that JoySauce was one of their top favorite things this year. So that happened a little bit earlier. So we're very pleased at that kind of response. And that's what inspired us to make more.
That's incredible. That's incredible, because those are some pretty big powerhouses
Yeah,
in
that's right.
the media industry and also in around the country. One thing that I want to commend you on is the American Icons that you did with George Takei.
Yes.
Was
Yeah.
that so? How did you get Mr. Takei to talk and to come on the show? And also, how did that play a big role in JoySauce's launch?
Yeah, so I am hugely grateful to George for giving us his time. I think we had met a couple of times with him. I think really the first time was over a video conference, just like you and I are, and everyone really hit it off, and I think that we were mission aligned. And certainly, he's a very, very busy individual who has done so much to advocate for both AAPIs and LGBTQ, as you know. So. We were very lucky, and we had some mutual friends in common. A great individual on the JoySauce team, Ben Press, who was a very prolific and successful Hollywood agent, used to represent George back in the day, and so we had some connection there. But the rest of it was really up to the team on my side to really convince George that this was a really good idea. And so I think he played an indelible, important, integral part of our launch, where I think he gave us some instant credibility right off the bat. It's like, okay, let's go right to the top. JoySauce launches with this long form, amazing interview with George Takei, where he talks incredibly candidly about growing up as a young Asian American and being interned and how that influenced him. And he talks about Star Trek, and he reflects on the world today and sadly how divisive our country is and what we might be able to do to kind of build more bridges and to heal. So it was a very, very important conversation that we had with him, and I appreciate that. But having said that, we also know that our platform is there to focus on emerging new AAPI talent and their allies. And so it isn't necessarily something that is a requirement that we always have a constellation of well-known celebrities. We will on occasion, we do on occasion, but the majority of our content is also focused on emerging newcomers.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. And speaking that, I think that leads into my next question, because you are joining the late night world with the JoySauce Late Night. So can you describe the series to my audience, and how do you think it will stand out in the world of late nights?
Yes, thank you for that, Jacob. So, JoySauce Late Night was conceived with a sort of big what if, what if there was this sort of parallel universe where Asian Americans, or sometimes we say American Asians, and I'll talk about why we flip the two words in a minute here. But what if there was a parallel universe where American Asians were shown by default to be just as smart and cool and edgy and beautiful and strong as everybody else, and that was always the default, that they were no longer just a sidekick or the butt of a joke or the villain or in a bit part. So one of the last bastions of sort of white male patriarchy, as it were, is, I think, the late night talk show. It is pretty much, I think, all of them now, with the exception of Drew Barrymore's show, but I guess that's more of a daytime show.
I'm so sorry, Jonathan. That is Drew is daytime.
Yeah, Drew is daytime, but she's doing an amazing job. And I would say that for the most part, it is the realm of older white men. And so we thought, well, what if we actually sort of did this experiment and had an all Asian American, host, co-host, cast members, writers, producers, makeup artists, wardrobe, cameramen, and guests. So what if that happened? And so that is the central sort of thesis for the show. And I think it looks really great. It's a lot of fun. The way that it sort of differentiates is that I also wanted to show the diversity of American Asians, just that really this concept that we can do anything. And it's particularly important to really advance that point. I mean, again, it may go without saying to anybody who's, educated and smart and aware that, well, of course, Asian Americans can do anything. But oftentimes in media, where we are only 2.5% of all speaking roles in TV and movies, and of the 2.5% of those speaking roles, the vast majority of those roles are not in lead roles. They're in kind of more supporting roles or sometimes more caricature type roles. It is really important to show a much more diverse offering of Asian Americans doing a diverse set of activities, whether it's that they're actors or musical artists, or they are stand-up comics. And so that's the other thing that we're hanging our hat on, is this sort of central tenet that Asian Americans, we can do anything.
And that's amazing to hear, because I'm thinking that you along with the Amber Ruffin show and also the Daily Show as well, have definitely played a big role in actually diversifying late nights.
Yes, I think so. I think that we all have to do our part. It is not either or. Certainly our position at JoySauce is that in creating space for American Asians, it is not at the exclusion of anyone else. And so if you look at JoySauce on a daily basis, you will not only will you find a very, I would say, one of the most diverse arrays of American Asians, ranging from East Asian to South Asian to Southeast Asian, and all of the different groups represented, and of course LGBTQ. But you'll also find that we include our allies, whether they are white Americans or African American. We welcome other voices, because we are all interconnected in this fabric, and we're all united by the fact that we call America our home.
Awesome. So we got to start winding down some of our conversations. Who are some of the guests that will be visiting JoySauce Late Night as the show progresses?
Yes. So the very first episode, which is up on joysauce.com right now, features Kiki Wolfkill, who is currently the creative head of the Halo franchise. And of course, Kiki and I worked together back in the day. She happens to be an amazing individual icon in the games industry, in addition to having been a professional race car driver. In another episode, we have premier American playwright David Henry Hwang, whom I think a lot of people, even if you don't follow Broadway, you'll know who he is as someone who's written a number of successful screenplays. Movies have been made of his shows, and he's just an amazingly astute guy that speaks intelligently about identity, Asian American identity in particular, and how that's evolved. We have on the show in a future episode Miranda Kwok, who is the writer, director, showrunner of the hit Netflix series The Cleaning Lady, which is amazing. It's, I think, one of the few if not the only show on air right now that features a BIPOC woman as a lead character. And so she's on the show. We have 3-time space shuttle NASA astronaut Ed Lu, who is now the head
Wow.
of an errant asteroid detection company. And so he talks it's absolutely fascinating, his solution for how to save the Earth from being impacted by an errant asteroid. And so he's another example of, so again, this concept, we can do anything. So it's not always going to be entertainment industry celebrities, but it's going to be from all walks of life.
That is so awesome to hear, and that's a really great lineup for that show. I really hope it's successful, and hope audiences can get to it. So one of my second to last questions is, if there are content creators that are watching this interview and want to want to work for JoySauce, what advice would you share with them regarding how to pitch and how they could start creating their own shows?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, my overall advice is just keep doing it. Put one foot in front of the other. Kind of fake it till you make it, if you will. If the best way to make something happen is just to make it happen, materialize it. Do anything you can to make it demonstrable so you can show people, this is my idea, this is my vision. So that's my general advice. Now, as it relates to JoySauce in particular, I would say that, we will welcome all pitches, and we do have a pretty rigorous editorial process where we meet once a week and we take the submissions, we kind of call them and organize them, and then we have a discussion about as many of them as we can, and usually we tend to favor the ideas that are a little bit more differentiated. So this is the kind of visibility that I'll give everyone out there, that we have, being someone now that where we're seeing a lot of submissions on a per week basis, which is the vast majority of the stories that we get submitted are sort of pitches about intergenerational trauma, or the some sort of relationship between parent-child that is a little bit fraught with identity issues or expectation issues, and how the person overcame that. We get a lot of those, and I'm not saying at all that those are not. They're clearly very valid and resonant stories that a lot of people share, but there are also a lot of those stories. So my advice to anyone pitching us might be, do you have a different angle? Do you have something that is maybe a little bit more differentiated and isn't the most common kind of perspective on AAPI identity, right? Was there something particularly unique about the way that you grew up or your family that makes a story a little bit more interesting? Or can you put a more interesting spin on it? So that would be one piece of advice. The second one is the smart idea always wins. And so we would almost prefer that you have a clever or interesting or more funny idea, and that the production values are maybe not a big budget, but that can be okay. If it was the reverse, oftentimes that is actually less interesting. So that would be my advice, is just lead with a really clever and strong idea first.
Awesome. So last question, are you ready?
Yeah, I am.
Where can they find JoySauce, and also where they can connect with you?
Yes. So you can find JoySauce, same place, www.joysauce.com. And from there on, you can take a look at all of our wonderful content. The site is organized by words, which is the incisive written editorial, podcasts, which there are many of them, and then shows, and then there are many of them. And so you can kind of browse and have fun reading, looking, consuming all of that content. If you want to get in touch with us, there is a contact us option where I promise you we read as many of those as we can. Usually, I think that most weeks we can be successful at reading almost 100% of the submissions. We do go through, we're pretty active there. And that's a great way to contact us. Of course, I personally am out on social media as well. Instagram and Twitter handle is @Jonathan Sposato. So that can sometimes be a way to get to me, but I can't promise that I'll respond immediately. Sometimes that can take me a little bit of time.
I totally understand. And we are very busy people, and we have a lot of things going on. And speaking of a lot of things going on, have you missed an episode of the Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar podcast? Visit our Apple Podcasts, Deezer, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Podcast Addict, Spotify, and Spreaker channels. It's Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar, JACOBELYACHAR. Now, are you on social media? Because I'm on social media too. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. It's Jacob Elyachar, JACOBELYACHAR. And just to let you know, Jonathan, jakes-shake.com, the blog that started it all, is celebrating its 12th anniversary this year.
Wow, congrats. That's amazing. Jake, what advice, let me turn the tables a little bit. What advice do you have for me in terms of longevity and sustaining an audience?
I always make sure that you're consistent and you know your strengths. For example, I have colleagues that covered a challenge, which is a big MTV reality TV show. I gaze into that world, but I don't know like the back of my head. However, I do know The Masked Singer and America's Got Talent. So I've been doing America's Got Talent since 2012. So
Nice.
always stick to your strengths and always try to make sure that you collaborate with people, with people.
That's great. That's great. I appreciate your advice. And with that, Jacob, I'm happy to, if you can think of ways that we can collaborate or ways that I can help you, please reach out and let me know.
Awesome, Jonathan. Thank you so much. And audience and everyone, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, have a great one, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.